Welcome everybody to our webinar. We'll be getting started momentarily as we give participants a chance to log in. Today's presentation will be a great overview of the college planning process for whatever stage you might be in, whether just starting out with young children or grandchildren and looking for ways to save, what's the best vehicle you might want to take a look at and use, or to those who are on the cusp of college applications and considering where to apply and what goes into all those considerations for selections and both financial and otherwise. With that said, let's get started. I want to introduce, in addition to myself, Chris Boyd, I'm joined by Jeff Perry, who has been a driving force behind this presentation. Our clients likely already know our team tends to work with families in or near retirement, but we certainly have families at all stages of their financial journey. Besides retirement, college expenses are one of the most significant financial decisions families and students make. With Jeff's granddaughter going through some of these same decisions, Jeff decided to produce this webinar, and I'm sure you will get a great deal from it. Also joining us is Cozy Wittman of College Inside Track. And if you haven't heard Cozy on our podcast, Something More, then you're missing out. She's a great wealth of knowledge. And as you'll find out, Cozy brings a great perspective to helping students find fit. Cozy will be discussing not only how to find the right fit, but also some of the financial aid considerations you need to consider. As we get started today, we're hoping for an open, engaging conversation from all of our panelists throughout, so you'll hear from all of us at various times throughout the program. So, as we know, higher education isn't for everyone, and people of all education levels can find happiness and fulfillment and job satisfaction. It is important to keep picture perspective. However, we also know that people who have more education tend to have higher incomes and lower unemployment. Jeff, maybe you want to start by walking us through some of the data.
Sure, certainly, and this might get into Cozy's area of expertise later about what you should be studying, but generally speaking, the amount of money that you'll be able to earn in your future is directly correlated to your level of education. And as you see here, a high school graduate typical will hopefully make about $45,000. If you have a bachelor's degree, goes up to $84,000 averages, and if you have a professional degree, $162,000 or 259% higher pay. And I think we kind of know that's true. The more education you get, the more opportunities you're going to have. I will just take a sideline here. This isn't just about college. We're talking about preparing for college, but this could be preparing for a vocational school or some type of trade school. It's about having a degree that can earn income and about making an investment in yourself, and as a parent and a grandparent, preparing your child or grandchild to have the ability to be able to afford that higher education.
Well, it's absolutely true. And one of the things that is also true, as I mentioned, people can have far less employment disruption when they have more education. So not only is it true that there may be higher income levels, but there's also the possibilities for lower unemployment. We've seen this in the financial crisis. We've seen this at various times when unemployment spikes, that people with higher education levels tend to have less disruption. It's not always the case, but it tends to be the case.
That's right. In different economic cycles, typically when you see a downturn, a recession, or perhaps something similar, the sector that gets hurt the most are the unskilled workers, the ones that can be replaced easily, and people who have higher skills tend to have more job security, and that's what this colorful graph is showing.
Yeah. Although I suppose COVID was one of those exceptions where, there were instances where people in any range of employment, but sometimes the people who had more education had more disruption because of the layoffs and the kind of work, the essential work that people at different ends of the spectrum had.
That's a good
So
point.
in any case, yeah, maybe we can talk about the issue of inflation.
Well, speaking of COVID, we certainly had our share of inflation across the board, but since 1983, which is what this graph shows, the rate of inflation for various categories, we hear about healthcare, medical care inflation rates are pretty high, and you can see that in this chart as well. But to no one's surprise, tuition itself wins this race or loses the race, depending on how you're looking at it, with an 873% inflation, cumulative inflation since 1983. And that's, we'll see in a few slides here, but this rate of inflation is difficult to keep up with. 5.7% is a typical annual increase, and it takes a lot of planning and starting early to be able to get ready for those increasing costs. Whether or not that continues into the decades to come is unknown, but we've certainly seen it in the last few decades.
Well, it definitely makes the point that sitting in a savings account is probably not the best way to, keep up with these kinds of considerations. You need to be planning for how to keep up and grow your investment to help, be ready for these costs.
Can I just point something out for folks? When we look
Please.
at flagship public institutions, which, I get the opportunity to talk to thousands of families all the time nationally. It's what I do primarily in my job. People are still kind of saving for $20,000 to $25,000 a year. And the public flagship university that's local to you, if you're on today and listening, is well over $30,000 a year. And this past year, we've seen about 10% increases in those public schools, where when you go up the chain to the more expensive schools, we're seeing much lower numbers, 2 to 3% increases nationally. So it's important that people are actually saving the right amount as well.
It's a great point. I think these numbers, Jeff, I was kind of looking at these numbers and thinking these seem like they probably don't include room and board. They seem like they're including cost of tuition. And, when you look at the kind of rates that are shown here, in any case, because we know that some of these private institutions with all in can be $70,000, $80,000 in today's environment.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think parents, when they get closer to, and the children themselves get closer to making these decisions, and they perhaps focus on tuition initially, but it's a lot more than tuition. It's tuition, it's fees, it's certainly supplies. It's, if they're living on campus, it's the cost of the dorms, the food. If they're involved in some other, maybe a heavy lab type major, there's lab fees. So it adds up quick, far beyond tuition.
I have to say that I was reviewing these slides, and I have a who has a newborn and a 3-year-old, and looking at the possibilities for private schools, that's $1 million out of pocket. That's just incredibly almost ridiculous that you could be prepared for that. Of course, inflation is part of that over that time, but
right.
And the value of the dollar will change, but it's really immense, and it really goes to the point that whether it's coming soon or coming later, you've really got to start planning wherever you are on your journey, and the sooner you can start, the better off you'll be, which I think may be part of some of the things you're going to talk about here.
Well, this can emphasize what happens, when you're not saving, right? We've seen in the past decade or two the increasing use of student loans, and you don't have to listen to some of the talk radio shows that are financial shows, or some of the shows on college planning, to hear when families call in about the massive debt load these are the average student loan balances. But if you listen to people commenting about, they left college and they have however many thousands of dollars of loans, it's not uncommon, especially if someone has a professional degree, to be well over $100,000 or $200,000 in loans. So it's really something, if you don't prepare for, your options are really limited as you're getting closer and closer to your college career.
Yeah, and this 324% increase since 2005 to 2023 is kind of amazing to think about the amount of debt that has grown in the student loan space over that period of time. Substantially more than some of the other areas that we've shown here.
And it's difficult for an 18-year-old going to school, going to college, and thinking about what they want to study and making all these decisions. And many of them who are not focused on finances, they don't really have a good appreciation for what signing that loan document means. They sign it, they get their distribution, they know that's how they're paying for their tuition and room and board. And then it's something that many families and students put in the back burner and think, we're going to deal with this when I graduate, because when I graduate, I'm going to be making tons of money, right? That's always the narrative. And I'll be able to pay these student loans. But some of these, not to reiterate too much, but some of these loans that they have are what we would call amounts that we're talking about mortgages on homes when we were buying houses, right?
Yeah.
So it's a heavy, as the slide says, it's a heavy burden for students to carry.
And so it raises questions for people to think about, what are they trying to get out of education? I think this is one of those challenging issues. Are you really looking for college to be a job training ground? Are you looking to use college as a liberal arts experience to, better have critical thinking and skills in reading and writing and so forth?
Right.
But that may require additional graduate education as well, or some additional, job training when you actually get into the workforce. So there's really, it's important to be clear about what are we trying to get out of this? What's the goal? And am I studying something that is marketable or will lead me in a way to something that is marketable? Important considerations.
Or at least balanced, right, for the debt that you take out, is what I would say, because people have different goals and philosophies around what college should be providing, to your point, Chris. I just think it's important that if you're thinking about this more as a life training ground, that you not take out $280,000 in total debt for life training.
Yeah, that's a great point. So when it comes to getting prepared for this, there are different vehicles you might entertain, different methods of, where to draw those funds to deal with it. And there's definitely some pros and cons along the way as to thinking about this. Jeff, do you want to walk through this slide a little bit?
Sure. I think this slide's demonstrating, as it says off to the right-hand side, about missed opportunities of $1.3 trillion in these categories that are held outside of a tax advantage 529 account. And we'll talk about more of those in a few minutes, but there's a lot of tax benefits of using a 529. We'll talk about that, but it's surprising to me to see the majority at 52% of families using, or the amount of cash, using cash or a checking account or a savings account to stow away this money, and to think about the missed opportunity from a tax standpoint, certainly, that they're paying taxes on whatever income that they're generating on the whoever owns the account, in theory, the parents. But they're also probably missing the opportunity, another opportunity, and that's to have some investment gains if it was appropriately invested in maybe something a bit more aggressive than cash or a checking account.
I think it's also worth talking about the idea of taking from your retirement account at work or something like that. These can be things that set you back and maybe not the best way. There can be times when a Roth IRA vehicle could be worthy of consideration. Jeff, you put together an article that we're going to be seeing published in the not too distant future that talks about these different pros and cons of different vehicles. Right. when it comes to, UTMAs versus a 529 plan, it's night and day in terms of the tax treatment, and could have impact on some of the decisions that happen when it comes to financial aid that Cozy will talk about a little bit later. Anything else on this you want to cover, or should I move on?
No, there's just some, the slide missed opportunities is really what this is about to me. Not only creating taxes that you don't need to, but about missing opportunities to get a better return on your money. If you think about your comments a few minutes ago, Chris, about your friend or your colleague that has 2 young children and they might have to save $1 million potentially, and they have 18 years or 15 years to do it. You really need the power of compounding interest or compounding capital gains in a tax favorable environment if you want to reach those types of goals.
Absolutely. Okay. So this gives a sense of how much should I be saving, and this can be intimidating because as you look at, where am I starting, and
Right.
the amount of inflation that's involved, and how much do I need? It can be overwhelming. The point ultimately is something is better than nothing, and to the extent that you can invest and prepare, you'll be better served than if you don't.
Sometimes when people see the big numbers, whether they're saving for retirement and, have a big goal of $1 or $2 million for a nest egg or more when they're retiring, or if they, if they're sitting here and watching our webinar and looking at these numbers, sometimes that big number that they can't achieve actually paralyzes people from starting.
Right.
So I think your point of do what you can and increase it when you can, but don't wait until you can afford everything, the whole thing to be able to reach your goal, because something is better than nothing in this case.
Right, exactly.
It's just like having children. If you wait till you can afford children to have children, you'd never have children.
Too late. Yeah. It's a good point. Might just be too late. Sorry, I thought I clicked on this. There we go. So this does make the point that earlier you start, the more benefit you get from the power of compounding, particularly if you're dealing with a tax sheltered environment. It's going to be more advantageous, but whatever the amount you can afford and whatever you do, start sooner, as soon as possible. The sooner the better.
Yeah.
And this is making the point about in a taxable environment versus like a 529 plan where essentially the money goes in. Sometimes you get a tax deduction on the way in, but ultimately it's growing tax-free. And when it's used for qualifying expenses for college or other types of circumstances, it comes out without a tax. And so whatever it can compound into is in a tax-free setting, ultimately. Very appealing.
People used to, one of the objections that people would formally give to saving in a 529 is, what if my beneficiary, my child, my grandchild, my family member, decides or isn't able to go to college and it's locked up there? Well, that wasn't technically true. It was something that was pervasive among people that we talked to about starting a 529. In a future slide, we're going to address some of the changes from the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0 that really take away some of those objections.
Well, I don't know if this was what you were looking to hit on, though, but with some of the comparison of different offerings as to way to deal with it, maybe worth talking about. We mentioned the idea of the 529 plan, the benefit of its tax-free if dealt with for qualifying expenses. Compared that to just a taxable account, even one that's a custodial account for the minor, a UTMA or a UGMA account, unified transfer to minors or unified forum gift to minors accounts. These can have value, but and they don't have any of the restrictions for it should be used for education. but they have a lot less tax advantage, and can be a considerable difference as to how that's used.
Yeah, the 529 education plan is the clear winner in this chart and really any analysis. And let's go through some of these factors, Chris. So just a brief kind of 529 plan 101. So the donor, if you will, the owner of the account who establishes the account is the one in control of the account, and they name, when they set up the account, they name a beneficiary. So in the traditional setting, if you're a parent, you may set up a 529 and start saving for your child. If you're a grandparent and you want to help save for your grandchild's future education, you do that, and you're the owner and the child is the beneficiary. And so a couple of big things is that the owner, meaning the parent or the grandparent or whoever sets it up, is in control of that account, which is a big deal. Because if you were saving in some different form, and you can see here for a custodial account or a Coverdale, at some point the child takes control of that account. And so that may be fine in many situations, or it may not be fine in some situations, right? If a child wasn't going to college under the custodial account and maybe didn't have a perfect lifestyle, or one that you agreed with, and they came into possession of these funds, they might not be used in the manner in which you intended them for. Another thing is, if you're the owner of the account and that child, that beneficiary, decides not to go to college, or maybe they get a full scholarship, or maybe they join the military, or whatever the situation is, that doesn't mean that money goes to the state or anything. That means you have the right to change your beneficiary. You can change it as much as you want, as often as you want. And so the money isn't locked up, even though it's designated for a specific person in the beginning, you have the right to change that beneficiary.
So it can go up and down the family tree, as an example, could go to a sibling, or could wait till the next generation. Maybe the child's child would end up going to college, whatever it may be. You have a lot of flexibility on how you might choose to reorient some of those funds.
Absolutely. And, it's not the preferred thing that we want you to think about, but if there was no beneficiary that was on your radar, you do have the right as the owner to withdraw those funds. You're going to pay a penalty and a tax to withdraw those funds, but you can get back your contributions and your earnings. So it's not locked up there.
Sometimes people worry about having money in there that doesn't get used up fully. And there's some good news from the Secure Act that we could talk about as well when it comes to how to deal with that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in I think the next slide, but before we move on, Chris, I want to note a significant benefit of the 529s is also the annual contribution limit.
Yeah.
You may say, well, that's a big limit for the 529, but sometimes if you're able to, if you have a net worth that allows you to do this, you can make a single contribution. Maybe when a child is born, set it up and forget it, and you'd be done. So that's an advantage of well.
Especially so it's effectively 5 years of the gift allowance. It could be
that's right.
Super funded, pre-funded, if you will, all in one time into the 529 plan.
That's right.
Jeff, I think before we leave it'd probably be worth talking about some of the changes in Cozy. You may want to chime in on this too, but the idea that used to be unappealing for grandparents to be the owner of a 529 plan, but there have been changes in how that's considered. Would either of you care to elaborate on how that functions?
Well, being a grandparent, I'd be happy to start it, and Cozy can add to it. So when my wife and I created a 529 for our granddaughter Faith that you alluded to earlier, this wasn't the case, what I'm about to say, but it is now. So when Faith applies to college, which is now, she's applying, and she fills out her FAFSA, none of the money in the 529 that my wife and I control is considered against her any financial aid that she would receive. So it doesn't go into that calculation, and that's brand new. I think it's this year, isn't it, Cozy?
As of 2024, last year.
Right. So that's a big benefit. And so if you're thinking about where the money belongs, who should be the owner of it, and you're a grandparent, instead of maybe giving it to the parents to invest in a 529 for the child, it may benefit the child later if the money stayed in the grandparents' control.
Yeah, and it used to be we'd advise people not to do this because it could disrupt the students' financial aid if they took that, if they got the benefit of those funds too soon.
Right.
Effectively.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, Cozy? Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to clarify, it happened on the 2024 FAFSA, which was technically last year, right? This year's FAFSA that
Okay.
people will eventually get to fill out because it's delayed.
Yes.
Is the 2025 FAFSA. So grandparents technically could have started doing this as early as 2022 because the way it was counted on the FAFSA was student income, and income has a 2-year look back. So grandmas, grandpas, and I want to point out it's also any other third party, aunties, uncles,
Yeah, good point.
Right. It could be anybody who wants to help a student save for school.
Yep.
Good point. Anything else you want to cover on this page, Jeff? There's a lot on here, but just sort of a comparative of some of the different types of ways people commonly use college savings vehicle, you know, how they want to structure that. There are some flexibilities, different ones. I think we all agree, I think the 529 plan really has the most to offer if education savings is an important priority for you. And even if you end up not using it that way, there's ways to benefit from that. And did you want to talk about the Roth? Did you talk about that sufficiently, or?
We haven't talked about it yet, but we can certainly talk about it now if you like. This slide's making our point that we made previously about the tax advantages and such.
Whatever you want. If now or later. Sorry.
So what happened in Secure Point 2.0 is that there's a provision that if there's money left over in a Roth, either the child didn't go to college or didn't use all the funds, that they are able to roll that remaining money from the 529 to a Roth IRA at a maximum of up to the maximum allowable contribution a year if they have earned income with a total lifetime maximum of $35,000. So that money goes from the 529 setting into the Roth IRA setting, tax-free, just slides right over. And if you think about it, if a child graduated from college or some other went into the military, didn't use it, whatever the situation is, and there was available money there, what a wonderful advantage for that young family member in this case to have a $35,000 Roth IRA, you know, at the end of their college career, and how much that would grow over the time period till they get ready for retirement.
A great leg up. And remember, oftentimes, even though we would encourage people to keep those funds for retirement, there are some times when it can be accessed with the purchase of a home or things like that. So there can be some virtue to that kind of a vehicle.
Yes.
Well, we kind of feel like there's a lot of benefits to the 529 plan, whether it comes to the benefits of tax treatment, the opportunity to super fund it with the multiple years of 5 years of gifting all at one time. What are some of the other things that we might want to reference as the virtues of the 529 plan?
So ultimately, if it's used for those educational expenses, it turns from tax deferred to tax free. And if it's rolled over into the IRA, that's a tax deferred or tax free exchange as well. As the second box explains, there's also some estate planning benefits that allow you to exclude certain amounts of money from your future estate taxes by doing this, as you indicated.
So in this case, the donor, the person funding this,
Right.
essentially moves this wealth out of their estate, even if they end up changing the beneficiary of the account. It's still something they can control, but it's not considered part of their estate in the process.
Yep.
Which is kind of unique.
Can I also point out, as it relates to kind of overfunding, if you will, part of the reason people end up with extra funds sitting in their 529 plan is often related to the fact that the student was able to receive scholarships at any amount, right? We're not talking about, and most kids don't get a full ride anywhere, right? But any amount of scholarship dollars can actually be withdrawn from that 529 plan penalty free. You would still have to pay the taxes on the growth,
Sure.
but can actually withdraw an equivalent amount out of that 529 plan penalty free.
Great point. Yeah, that's a great point. So that kind of scratches that itch when people have that worry. If, oh, what if my kid's so smart, they're going to have a scholarship? There's still a way to get at that money. It's also worth pointing out that sometimes plans, 529 plans, do limit the amount you can add to a 529 plan. Most of us aren't going to be worried too much about that, but if for some reason you're super diligent and the account grows and grows and you're still adding to it, there can be a case, and that's different from plan to plan as to what that amount might be, but be aware that there can be a point where it can be maximized.
That final block where it says, oh, sorry.
I'll go back. Oh, that's right.
Yep. The final block just shows how flexible and how easy it is to get started. There's no income limits for the contributors. There's no age limit for the beneficiaries or the contributors. There's no mandatory withdrawals. Very easy to get it going. We often start accounts for new parents or grandparents who want with very modest amounts, and making a monthly contribution, as that previous slide showed, is a very common way. So it's very, very easy to set up one, very easy to fund it, and lots of flexibility in the future if it's not going to be used as
And
you
there are
might
some
first
choices.
anticipated.
Yeah, and there are some choices, though. Usually these are done with funds. These are accounts within the 529 plan. Often think of them like a mutual fund, essentially. But you may, at different plans, you may have the opportunity to select which funds you want to use, and other plans may be more of an age-based. As the student gets closer to the likelihood of using them, they get a little more cautious in the way they're designed. And so there may be some good choices from which to select as you want to think about where you place your 529 plan, whether it's in your state's offerings or not. There may be choices to be made.
And most of those 529 plans, you'll have the possibility or likelihood of a greater return than, back to the previous slide where we saw 52% of the funds being saved for college were in basically bank accounts.
Right. Right.
I think we're continuing on with the flexibility theme about a 529 where, it can be used for an array of educational expenses far beyond what people may have first thought about, meaning tuition and fees, room and board, as the slide indicates, books, supplies, computers, apprentice programs, and, something that many people don't know, but it can also be used for K through 12 schools. You don't have to strictly use this for college, or you can use it, as we talked about in the very beginning of our webinar today, you could use it for a vocational or a trade school. So the definition of educational expense is pretty broad, and it would also include if you were in a situation where a student was getting a loan, 529 plans could be used later to pay off those loans.
I had missed that until doing this preparation for this. I hadn't been aware that that was something now that 529 plan resources could be utilized for. There is a cap on that as to how much.
Right. But it's super flexible.
I think maybe it was 10,000, sound right?
Yeah, it's $10,000.
But anyway, it can be utilized for those kind of purposes. Yeah, but nice to know. All right. And then this was the slide talking about what Jeff already covered. Sorry, I jumped the gun there, Jeff.
I was trying to
about the notion that you could have. Huh?
I was trying to
What's
pull
that?
it off, but yeah. So this is the slide.
Yeah.
It just demonstrates what a wonderful thing. Perfect scenario, right? You save for your grandchild's college. They get scholarships, as Cozy mentioned, or they don't need all the money. You roll that 35,000 over a period of years. Right now, it'd be $7,000 a year. And age 65, according to these projections, which assumes a 7% annual return, for doing absolutely nothing, no saving at all on part of the child, but they have a
Yeah,
Roth
so
IRA.
just for clarification, as far as the functionality, how it accomplished, you can't just roll the 35,000 all at once.
Yep.
Has to be that they have income. If they have income, let's say exceeding the maximum amount you could contribute to your IRA, $7,000 in this example, then each year they could roll over enough to, satisfy their contribution amount through the conversion. So
There are
in any
some
case,
new,
a great option to have.
Yep, just for disclosure, there is some specific boxes you have to check to be able to do this. The account has to be open for 15 years is the big one, and
Yeah.
But
And
there's nothing
not
that
for
stops you from
contributions.
waiting. There's nothing that stops you from waiting to reach that 15 years. The money could remain in the account until you met all the criteria for the rollover.
Yeah, and not from funds just within the last 5 years as well.
Right.
So very good. What else?
I think this is one that we talk to our retirement planning clients a lot, right? Where they have, or maybe they didn't save adequately for their child's education or grandchild's, and they're contemplating using retirement funds. And that's a tough thing.
We're talking about right now, just this notion of we'd like to make the burden a little less for the kids, and
Right.
how should we do it? And in their case, it probably means they either need to work a few more years to be able to, absorb the impact that it would have on their savings, or not. Finding that balance of what are you willing to do and how much. But if you're taking it from the 401k or something like that, there can be some drawbacks. Can be, if you're, sometimes people try to do things through loans, but that can undermine your performance in your 401k. If you're taking it out as withdrawals, that means some tax consequences as well. So there's a variety of things to be thinking about and probably trying to avoid if possible when contemplating using your retirement resources as the way to pay down student debt.
Before you do this, it's an important step to meet with your financial advisor and model this decision out, whether or not by being generous, and we all love to be generous to the people that we love, but by being generous, are you jeopardizing your own financial security, your retirement future, the way that you have thought that you'd like to live in your retirement and doing the things that you'd like to do? This is a pretty common question. As you see, 2 in 5 Americans have used retirement funds to pay for college, so this isn't an unusual thing. But make sure you go in with your eyes wide open about how much this is going to set you back, and whether or not, as you said, it's going to require you to work longer or maybe have less income, less money to draw from in the years that you need it the most.
And remember, if you're thinking about actually withdrawing from your retirement plan to pay for tuition or pay down debt, if you're not yet 59 and a half, there's likely to be some penalty taxes as well, in addition to the income tax.
Even if you are, if it's a non-Roth product, you're going to have taxes to pay.
Right.
So, and if you're still working, the tax bracket may be higher than you think.
And this point is simply the notion, by the way, we appreciate some of the research and resources that JP Morgan Asset Management provided, that we've utilized in much of this presentation. In any case, this point is just the impact of a little bit of difference, a little bit of performance difference can have a huge impact with the power of compounding. So I suppose it's not shocking for people to see this, but when you see the amount of difference, that 1% can really add, or 2% can really add considerable differences in the compounded impact.
Absolutely, and it could even be worse if you think about bank money and what the rate of return has. It's been fine lately, but historically has been the last couple of decades has been significantly lower than, say, even the example of the 4%, where if you were more exposed to some type of equity position, especially in the early years of saving, and when you had a long runway before you were going to need the money, it can be very meaningful, the difference. Same logic as when you're thinking about your retirement planning and starting early and taking more risk, perhaps, if your risk tolerance is able to do that.
I think people naturally worry about the risks of investing and the potential for disruption to their rate of return. This slide does a nice job talking about that, Jeff. Maybe you want to walk people through that.
Yeah, certainly. It's the closer you are to your goal, you probably want to reduce. Just like if you're entering retirement, you may not want to be full in, but I think the key, it's applicable to most 529 plans, certainly any ones that we would recommend, is that you stay diversified and have your money professionally managed in a mutual fund or some type of state fund that is being taken into account, all the things that we take into account when we're choosing investments or mutual funds for our clients. When I was saying take some equity exposure, I'm not suggesting that you're buying individual stocks or you're, basically gambling with the money in some way. I'm suggesting that you use a fund that maybe state specific, maybe not, but that is designed for college savings and also keeping in mind the age of your beneficiary.
I think this points out the fact that cash is going to likely underperform the rate of inflation in education, no matter just about any time. And then when you look at the idea of having a blended portfolio, even though it does have risk, it tends to outperform an all bond mix. And yet, in various circumstances, the mean here, this midpoint average returns are still very attractive when it comes to trying to compete with the rate of inflation that happens with education expenses, and ultimately in just about all of these circumstances, it has the opportunity to outperform that rate of inflation. So things to keep in mind. If you need help with this, certainly we'd be happy to talk to you more about your 529 plan or planning for your college savings. Let's turn to some of Cozy's ideas of information that we want to move to. And Cozy, I will stop sharing my screen so that you can take over and share yours.
As Chris mentioned at the beginning, my name is Cozy Wittman. I'm with College Inside Track, and our focus as an organization is helping families find right fit schools. And we define fit as the right academic fit for the student, the right social fit for the student, but also the right financial fit for the family. So making sure the schools that make it to the list can accommodate the family budget, whatever that budget is. So I just want to pick up on the conversations around financial aid, because what I find is that families have a really different definition of financial aid than the colleges have. And so when colleges talk about financial aid, they're actually referring to three buckets. I'm going to cover two today. The first bucket they're referring to is need-based money. So grants, and sometimes colleges will call need-based money scholarships, which makes it very confusing, because at the end of the day, merit-based money is always called a scholarship, which leads to confusion when your neighbor's kid got a scholarship from Harvard, but we know that Harvard does not do merit-based scholarship money. People assume because that kid was smart and did a lot of cool things with their high school time frame that they got the money for being smart and doing all those cool things, when really a school that's in that selective realm like a Harvard, actually what they got was need-based money because they had some level of need. These are separate buckets of money at College Land, and not every school has both buckets. Go ahead, Chris.
Cozy, I just wanted to ask you, it looks like we're seeing the PowerPoint, but not in the presentation mode.
Better?
No, maybe we're just sharing the wrong screen.
No, I switched displays.
Jeff, are you seeing the same way I am?
Yes. Perhaps if you click the slideshow option.
Sure. We'll give that a go. I use dual screens on my end, so it's hard for me to tell. It looks like it's not showing anything now, though. Correct?
Correct.
Hmm. Oh,
Would you like me
nothing.
to do it on mine, or?
Yeah, go ahead if you want. Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right, let me back up to where you are. So let me know if I'm not, what screen I should,
Start with the asset income screen, if you don't mind. Oh, you're probably going to need to go to like slide 12.
okay, give me a second here. Am I in the right ballpark?
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
So when we look at need-based aid is always delivered based on the outcome of a FAFSA, or sometimes schools will use a secondary financial aid form called the CSS profile. And the CSS profile is a private form. You don't get a report back. The FAFSA, on the other hand, you'll get a report back that tells you what your student aid index actually was. And then the colleges that only use the FAFSA take their sticker price, they subtract that student aid index number, and that tells them if you have need. And a surprising number of people in this country, at least surprising to them, have need when they didn't think that they might. I think it's helpful though, because often people think that the FAFSA can be manipulated. I think it's helpful for people to really understand what the formula of the FAFSA looks like. And when we look at the formula, parents get assessed on the formula. Their income is assessed up to 47%. If you're over the age 65, that gets assessed at a lower rate. But if you're under 65, you're at the 47% rate. Your assets, on the other hand, are only being assessed at that tiny 5.64%. So I can't emphasize enough the stuff that Jeff and Chris were talking about. Save for college. Yes, that 529 plan goes on your FAFSA, but it's assessed at that very low 5.64% when you intend 100% of it to be used to pay for college, right? So saving for college, good. Students, on the other hand, their assets and income get assessed at much higher rates. Students typically don't have much of either of these, so it's not usually an issue. I do want to point out, though, if you're one of the families using an UGMA or an UTMA account, that actually, per the comments Chris and Jeff made earlier, that's actually a student asset, despite of the age of majority in that state, and that student asset gets assessed at 20%. So a 529 plan is a much more favorable assessment for the FAFSA form as well. And then, as our discussion mentioned earlier, grandparents not assessed at all. You can move on to the next slide for me, Chris, if you don't mind. So as mentioned, the FAFSA really cannot be manipulated. What we see is that most parents can't remove themselves from the FAFSA form. The independent status is really reserved for people who are basically adults going back to school. So just assume if you have an 18-year-old that they're not going to be an independent adult. The case scenarios where that would be true don't fit the vast majority of families. When you're filling out your FAFSA form, and by the way, the FAFSA is delayed again this year, so if you're watching this and you currently have a senior, the FAFSA will not be released until December 1st, and the FAFSA you'll be filling out is the 2025-2026 FAFSA. I want to point that out because lots of people have gone out and filled out the wrong FAFSA already this year. So hold off. The new FAFSA form is not going to be available till December, fingers crossed. But when you do go to fill that out, your retirement accounts don't go on there, and the value of your primary residence does not go on there. What is included would be any small business assets. So if you own your own business, the assets of that business. If you have a farm, the assets of the farm actually go on the FAFSA form. There's a beautiful chart on FAFSA.gov that shows you how much you are supposed to put down for assets based on the net value or market value of your business. If the family has divorce as
Can I
part
just
of,
ask
oh,
you,
yeah.
Cozy, what if people don't know the value of their business? Not every business has done a business valuation. You're saying this item on FAFSA will help them to identify what to calculate their business valuation?
No, it leaves it up to them to calculate that piece. However, here's what I would include. If you own your buildings, right? Your checking and savings accounts for sure. Capital equipment. So if you're a farmer, things like a combine or other major equipment. If you're a manufacturer, the value of the equipment in your manufacturing. Unsold merchandise, that's true in both, sometimes with both farmers and small business owners, right? Any inventory you have laying around, it is the market value minus debt, by the way. So if you still have a mortgage, for instance, on your business, maybe the buildings that your business is in, you get to subtract out the debt. So once you add all that up, then you go out and use the chart, and the chart says if you are valued here, then this is how much you put down on your FAFSA form. In the case of divorced parents, the parent who fills out the FAFSA, because only one is going to, is actually the parent who is financially supporting the student more. The federal government has left it up to families to figure out what that means, family to family. So families need to do their best. It is not based on who has custody of the student, and it is not based on who claimed that student as a dependent on their taxes. So I think all of that is important to keep in mind. As of the 2024 FAFSA, last year's FAFSA, multiple kids do not impact the outcome of needs. So if you have multiple kids in college at the same time, the formula no longer takes that into account. So when you fill out two FAFSA forms, you fill out student form A, your income is the parent assessed at 47%. When you fill out student B's FAFSA form, your income is assessed at 47%, which means the formula now presumes 94% of your income can go off with your student to college, which means big picture. What does that mean from a, like, how does that actually impact me as a parent? It means college got a lot more expensive because it wasn't unusual for families to qualify for need when they had two kids in college at the same time. Now, that has no impact, right? And so those families that would have qualified no longer qualify. The one plus side to the FAFSA is that it can also be used as demonstration of your ability to pay. So it is a way for families to say to the school, I don't need your need-based aid, right? So don't give me any, I don't care. You can see from my FAFSA form that I do not need your need. And that can be beneficial at selective schools around the country, for instance, where the family needs to let the school know, like, look, you don't have to spend money on this, right? So don't even put that in the considerations in terms of accepting my students. All right, let's do the quiz. I lent this in. I think it would be helpful for people to understand kind of loans that are available to families because of course, the FAFSA, here's the deal. Colleges are only going to cover a certain percentage of need. You can count on two hands the number of schools in the country that cover 100% of need without the student having to take out the federal loan. And so I think it's important for people to understand where to go looking for loan money, what loans to consider, and then which ones to avoid, or at least go into those relationships with your eyes wide open. The first loan I always recommend to every single family, because at the end of the day, it's the only loan the student can own by themselves, is the federal undergrad student loan. It's called the Federal Direct Loan. If you're ancient like me, it used to be called the Stafford loan. There still is that verbiage floating around. Just know it's the federal loan. The way you get access to this loan is by filling out your FAFSA form. So it is not a need-based loan. Every student can qualify for this loan. What changes family to family is, will a percentage of that loan amount, will that student qualify for some of that to be subsidized loan, which means that the interest is being subsidized while the student's in school. Sometimes families say to me, well, and we would like to take out probably the subsidized loan. Yep, we all would, but you don't get to decide that. The schools actually decide it for you. And you could find yourself need-based on some campuses and not need-based on others. So you might get access to the subsidized loan on some campuses, but not on others. And it's important to just understand that. Today, this loan sits at 6.53%. When you look at market loans today, it's still well under kind of market pricing. And so that's another good reason to take this loan out. The origination fee is small, it's like 0.9% or something like that. The payments for this loan begin 6 months post-graduation, so your student has an opportunity to go out and find a job first. And then if they are working in a nonprofit, in a government-related role, teachers, doctors, lots of people who work in our world today qualify for the loan forgiveness programs. It is public service loan forgiveness, though, so again, you have to be in one of those qualifying industries. After the federal loan, because one of the challenges to the federal loan is that you don't get access to very much money. And so sometimes people still have a gap. I recommend state level loans after that. The state loans are available in some states. Today, very few states actually have access to a loan any longer. Most of them have closed up these programs. The state of Massachusetts, however, has an excellent loan available. It actually has an array. It's got anywhere from 5.75 all the way up to 8.5% interest on this loan. It's a fixed rate loan. The 6.35 is just kind of what the average is that we see coming out of that loan today. It does require a co-signature, and that final bullet actually doesn't apply to the MIFA loan. The state of Minnesota also has a state loan, and it has a cap. The MIFA loan actually doesn't really have a cap. It's there to kind of cover whatever is left over. After state level loans, because as mentioned, lots of states don't have that as an option, people could look at either private loans, and I really love NerdWallet for the evaluation of student loans. They do every year. They go through and they evaluate the loans. They look at things like origination fees, interest rates, history and shenanigans of the loan. So if the loan has had we sell all our loans off very quickly to much higher interest rate providers, or after graduation, we go from the 1.9% to 12%. So they look at stuff like that. It's a pretty good evaluation. And then the last loan available, of course, is the Federal Parent Plus loan. This is a parent loan. So as a parent, you have to feel very comfortable taking out debt on behalf of your student. This is not a student loan. Today, this loan sits at 9.08%. So I always tell people, look, if you already have a HELOC on your house, I would look at that. Either way, it's your debt, and you might get a more favorable interest rate from your bank. Also, you've already paid the origination fee, so no need to pay the 4% origination fee that goes on this loan. This loan actually, I always tell people it's like ice cream, it fills in the spaces. The Federal Parent Plus loan assumes the student is first taking out that federal student loan. So it'll cover anything after aid and that federal loan. Next slide. Here's a quiz. So roll out our quiz and our answers. Of the options available here, which school path do you think is the least expensive path? Is it choosing a 4-year school, starting at a 2-year and then transferring, starting in a public, transferring to a private, or starting at and finishing at a 4-year private university? And Chris and Jeff, you guys cannot play along because you probably know the answer to this question. So we're going to go.
And I was surprised when I found out.
Very good. The answer is, it depends, right? So all the above could be true. It was a trick question. And the reason that's true today is all the circumstances that surround a student are what equate to what the price of college is actually going to be, right? So the state they live in, the relationships between 2-year and 4-year schools in that state, the decisions the students made in high school, the activities they decided to participate in, how they present themselves in an essay and application, all of those things factor into the cost of college today. So you cannot tell anyone, here's the single way to keep the cost of college down. One sure way to do it is making sure your student doesn't transfer. So right fit is the key there, because transferring does typically bring up the cost of college. You can go to the next slide, that's fine, Chris, thanks. So to the way to think about college today, if you're already thinking about schools as public and private or in-state and out-of-state, you're already playing on the old game boards, right? It isn't how the world works today. Today, schools are flexibly priced or they are inflexible in their pricing. And you can't say public here and private here, because there's a mix of all kinds of schools in both options. And if we just look at the state of Michigan, we see this. If we look at University of Michigan, they are inflexible. If you are not from the state of Michigan, there is not merit scholarship money for your student, and you're not going to get need-based money because it's a public institution and you're not taxpayers of that state. So you will pay whatever they're charging, $76,000, $78,000 a year for their college education. However, if the student's up for looking at Eastern Michigan, Northern Michigan, Western Michigan, those are all public institutions, none of which charge out-of-state pricing. So there are ways to keep the cost of college down. One of the challenges I find is that what people actually want is the big brand school at the little school price, right? And that just doesn't work in the world today. College is supply and demand, baby, right? University of Michigan can get full fare for all their kids because guess what? I haven't met a kid yet that doesn't bubble up Michigan as something they want to consider. So that's why these look like that. And the same is true in the private space too. One of my kids went to a private school for the same price as one of our lower end priced public institutions in the state of Minnesota where I live, right? So it's really important today to start to think about the landscape the way it actually works. Next slide. Today, if you're not going to be need-based, so let's just take that off the table, if you're looking for scholarships to reduce the price of college, the place you look are the colleges, not the internet, not private parties. Those typically are not going to be enough money to move the needle if they move it at all for you. Next slide. Today, the 3 factors that reduce the cost of college are A, the colleges that make it to that list. I should make that bubble the biggest bubble here because that is the primary driver here. Then the decisions that your student makes while they're in high school impact their ability to get scholarship dollars. And then essays and applications and how you represent yourself in those. Those are the 3 primary factors that impact how much scholarship money the student gets. So as a parent, what should you be looking for? Well, the first thing you got to know is, does the school even give merit aid in the first place, right? Is that something this school does? And if they do, if the answer is yes, then here's some of the things the schools are thinking about. The first thing is grades and test scores. You want to look for schools where your students' numbers bring them in slightly above than the college's incoming average, which, good news, doesn't mean your student has to have a 4.0. If they're the 3.3 kid, you want to look for schools where the average incoming GPA is a 3, right? So that's how to start to think about this. Extracurricular talents matter, not in the way most people think. You do not need to be well-rounded, right? They don't want the singing football player. That is not what they're looking for, right? They really want kids that just represent themselves well, whatever that is. So if you're the student athlete, go crazy in athletics, right? Coach small fries, go out and help a coach other kids. Run your own health camp in your backyard. There are all kinds of things that you can do to just go deeper. And then the last one is pretty interesting to most folks, be demographically interesting. Demographically interesting just means look outside your region. I know, I was also the parent who said, stay in the state, go to a state school, right? That was me. Turned out I was cutting myself off from some of the best money available in the marketplace today. Most kids want to stay within 100 miles of their house. They talk a big game, but when they choose close to home. And guess what? Schools in the state of Massachusetts do not need more Massachusetts applicants, right? They just don't. That's where most of their applicants come from. So spreading yourself out is just a good idea. So I want to give you just a peek, and you can scroll through these if you want, Chris. I want you to get a peek at how schools think, right? This is a recipe card for how schools give away money. This is one school's recipe card, but I wouldn't share it if it didn't apply to hundreds of schools, thousands of schools around the country. And you can see what they're looking for are successful kids, successful as defined by them, so whatever their campus currently looks like, who are interested in them, and who are not from their region. At the end of the day, that's what this recipe card screams. So don't think that if you're staying in your state, you're automatically making this cheaper. You may not. You actually might be paying more. When I look at my 3 kids, one went to our public flagship school, one went out of state to a state school, and one went out of state to a private school. The out-of-state state school and the private school were both significantly $8,000 and $10,000 less a year than our public flagship school. So it's important today to cast a wider net. Some of the trends, and I'm going to just scroll through these briefly because I want to get you thinking about college as a business. But I just want to point out that the list of selective schools continues to grow. One of the things that happened during COVID is that a lot of the schools went test optional. The test optional landscape blew the doors off application numbers. So we have schools like Duke, who got 54,000 applications last year for 1,700 spots, right? UCLA, 147,000 applications for 9,000 spots. And so because these schools are seeing higher and higher numbers of applications, what we see are their acceptance rates going down because the size of their freshman classes aren't changing. So the number of kids they can take is the same, the application numbers are up. And when a school reduces their acceptance rate, you see behavior changes. Scholarships dry up. They lean into early decision. Wake Forest took 58% of their freshman class out of early decision pools. So it's important to understand that the landscape has changed. You don't just smart your way into that style of school. So what is early decision? What does this actually mean? Early decision is a decision. Go to that second bullet for me. It is your student saying, I love you so much, I'm coming. No matter what, I'm coming, right? So one of the rule changes that happened in September 2019 is antitrust buttons got pushed, right? And so schools can no longer restrict the number of overall applications. You can only use early decision one time, but they can't keep you from applying to other schools. You do agree, however, that you will withdraw those applications if you get accepted. So keep that in mind. It is a decision. Use it strategically. Wake Forest, 58% out of freshman class out of early decision. Cornell, 10 to 13%. So if you're going to play the card, play it in the right place. And then don't use this. If you cannot afford the sticker price of the school, you should not be using early decision at all. Because early decision, you make that decision before you see financial award packages. I do want to point out, though, that you can back out of it if you can't afford the school. It's important to understand acceptance rates. I think lots of people, so if I said to you, hey, Chris, let's have lunch next week, and there is a 3.9% chance that I'm actually going to show up, right? Chris is probably not coming to the restaurant next week to meet Cozy, who's probably not showing up. But if I say to a kid, you know, Stanford has a 3.9% acceptance rate, they automatically think, awesome, I can get in, I got this, right? So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And that's not my joke, by the way, that came from somebody else, but I thought it was perfect. It's a perfect analogy. I do want to point out this is not exclusive to private schools. You can see the bottom 3 are public institutions in their states. UT Austin at 6.4, UVA at 19. These are hard schools to get into. The other thing that is notable is it's not enough to be smart anymore, folks, because acceptance is more than grades and test scores when you have an acceptance rate of 7%, right? The big brand selective schools need your student to do more. Special projects, research projects, passion projects, community service projects, something that sets your student apart from the average high school student, who is also, by the way, doing all of those things, right? So today it's important to just think about it more. And at the end of the day, whether selective schools are on your list or not, you really do want an activities list that matches your student. If your student doesn't like the arts, they don't need to be doing the arts. If your kid is not a sport kid, they don't need to play a sport. That's probably the biggest misnomer floating around on the parent Facebook pages. Your kids should be representative of them, and their activities should represent them. That is the number one thing that I want parents and students to understand. You don't have to drown yourself in a bunch of stuff you don't care about. Next slide. This is probably the most important thing. Chris Wells, the guy that owns College Inside Track, says all the time, college is a match to be made. It is not a prize. You're not winning a prize when you get into school, right? So search for success, not brand. It's so important today. 3,500 colleges and universities in the US, sometimes more if you count them differently. They are not all the same school, right? So thinking about who fits me well. All the selectives even aren't the same. UChicago, really different than Stanford, right? These are different schools with different philosophies, and they fit a different style of student. 80% of kids change their mind about their degree, so just plan for this, right? Don't angle in on a single school because they've got one degree your student's interested in. That's a guaranteed transfer, increasing the cost of the degree. So you want to go deeper, right? What are the other alternatives my student might choose on this campus? What are the needed support structures your student is going to need? What kind of scaffolding do they need to be successful? Start to look for that on these school campuses. And guess what? Not all colleges are a monolith. They don't all teach the same way. So you don't want to always just be looking for the butt-in-chair campus. If your kid is a hands-on learner, they're hands-on learning campuses. There are schools that have a philosophy of do while learn, right? So you want to seek those out so your student can be successful. You don't have to go to college. You're choosing it. And so you want to make sure that you're choosing a partner in your student's success. Next slide. All right, this is my last point today. Testing does still matter. I can't say this enough. Somehow during COVID, people got the impression because schools went test optional, which really just says send it or don't send it. It doesn't say anything about what the colleges think about that, right? It gives the student the option. And so today, the schools see both tests as equal tests, ACT or SAT. It does not matter to the college what you send. They are interested in the scores primarily. Schools are stepping back into test required. There was a study that came out last spring, super compelling evidence, at least for the colleges, that demonstrated that guess what? Testing is a better predictor of college success than GPAs. And the primary reason for that is the artificial inflation that's happening in the high schools today around GPA. So some schools, some high schools actually weight things like honors classes. Well, an honors class is not the same as a college level class. It's not the same as AP, IB, or dual credit. And so consequently, what we see are kids showing up on campuses with these elevated GPAs. They're not ready for college. And so this study was really all the colleges need to step back into, like, we thought this was the case, so here we are again. We're going to go back to test required. And then when you register for these tests, they ask your student, put in schools you want to send the score to. Do not do it. Don't do it until you are done testing. Once you're done testing, you can 100% put in your schools. But you know, if your student really bombs the first test, they haven't prepped, they haven't done anything for it, and this unprepped cold test score goes off to the school, yes, you can take it again, but they can't unsee the score, right? So I think it's really important to hold off, wait, because you may not want to send it at all. And if the conclusion is, I don't want to send this score to my school, but you put in the school codes, it went by itself. So I think that's important. So we do free consultations. This is the thing I do with the vast majority of my day when I'm not hanging out with Jeff and Chris. The goal here is to get your family's questions answered, right? I start every single one the same way. What do you guys want to talk about? And then families bring all their anxieties around college to the table, which is great. And that's what we talk about. We talk about those 3 goal areas: academic, social, and financial. I help you with some strategies that you can think about that fit your family. These are great tips. They don't fit every single family. So we can talk specifically about your goals for your student. And your student should be there, by the way, because we're going to include them in the conversation. I can help you figure out your FAFSA outcomes so you'll know, like, are we going to be the merit-only family, or might we qualify for some need-based aid on some campuses? So we can work on that together.
Well, thank you, Cozy. Great stuff, as always. So much great content. Thank you all for participating with us. If you have any questions, we're happy to address them. You can put them in the Q&A. We've gone a little longer than we might have intended, so I do want to certainly give you information. Would you want to request a consultation and speak with Cozy? You can reach out to her at College Inside Track with her phone number and email on the screen. cwhitman@collegeinsidetrack.com for the email. And of course, we're happy to help you if you have any questions about your financial planning as it relates to college readiness very soon or a long ways off. We're happy to talk as well. And I put Jeff's email, jperry@wealthenhancement.com, as the way to go for that. So with that, Jeff, anything else you wanted to add, or Cozy, any last thoughts that we should be speaking to?
I have a question for Cozy. With the delay in the FAFSA, how will that work for the early admission and students who would make those early decisions?
Yeah, so what we saw last year were schools kind of delaying getting information out to students. We're not seeing that as much this year. So you might guess they had a practice year at this
Right.
delayed timeline. So we're seeing acceptances, but I think it's important for families to know, like, you actually don't have to act on the college's acceptance of your student until May 1st. So take your time, wait for the schools to get back to you with financial information. If that's important, some families it's not, right? Some families have saved well and they're not so worried about the price of college. But I haven't met a family yet that isn't interested in value. So waiting for the financial aid package to get back to you, I think, would just be a good idea. So we're seeing now decisions getting made. Students are getting acceptances. They just don't have a financial package to go with it. And it is typically delayed in most years. You don't see those 2 things come together.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your expertise, Cozy. It was very enjoyable and informative. Appreciate
As
it.
always.
Yeah.
As
I'm always
always.
happy to come back.
Awesome. We're going to share this as a recorded program and on our podcast. We hope people will share it as well. They found it valuable. And in the future, if you have questions, send us email. Both of us, I'm sure, will be happy to try to be a resource to our viewers and listeners. So with that, Jeff, Cozy, thank you so much. And to all you participating and listening, thanks for being with us. And let us know how we can help. Thanks, everybody.